Hi everyone, welcome to this video. In this video, we are going to discuss the potential interview question that can be asked based on this project. So, if you have already executed this project and now you are planning to present this project in your interview, this video will help you prepare for your interview. These are the practical real world interview questions and not just conceptual theory questions, so that the interviewer usually asks to understand whether you truly worked on the project or not. From this, get the they get that perception of yours on the project execution and your experience with that project. So by the end of the interview question series, you will have a clear understanding and idea of how to explain your project confidently in an interview. So first of all, as you can see, you might have executed this real-time data Azure pipeline project. So in today's world, organization generate massive amount of the data. So the companies which are capable of processing real-time data in a huge competitive advantage. However, this real-time data pipeline basically solves the challenges like automation, cost optimization, and efficient processing. So this is the third project in the project series. In the first part, we implemented the Azure Medallion. In the second part, we focus on the Azure DevOps, where we built a CI/CD pipeline. So if you are not a part of Project Pro, you just need to look into this kind of things. We have the repository of big data and data science project, where we provide the end-to-end solutions in our project. So you can opt for it. Coming back to the interview questions, we have designed some few interview questions for our project, and using those, you can just go through it and then prepare for your interview accordingly. Now we are going to show you some interview questions. So this interview question may look simply on the surface, but trust me, this is where the interviewers actually test whether you have designed a pipeline or your own or not. So these are the conceptual and the most drilled question which you need to prepare for an interview. So we will discuss the interview questions in detail. So for that, what we have done is we have basically created an interview guide where we are going to include in the download code section of this project, where you can just go to the project platform, and then in the download code section, you can just simply go inside it and download this interview guide. We will also provide you with the interview questions, interview answers, and then resume bullet points. So that's what it really shines. So after completing the project and going through each and every questions, you might get stuck at a point where you need to write a resume for this particular project. So in such scenario, what we have done is we have basically created, so let me just go to that page. So we have created some bullet points for a resume which you can use so that you can also pass the ATS test for your resume. So it basically helps you a lot. So you can just go to the resume page and then copy the resume bullet points from there and then put that into your resume so that your resume could really shine. Now coming back to the interview questions. So these are the questions that we have written. So we will discuss each and every question in detail. Don't worry about the answers. If you just go here, as you can see, we have also written down some answers of these questions accordingly. So you just need to go to the questions. So I'll highly recommend you to first solve these questions on your own. And then if you get stuck at some point of time, you can just scroll down a bit where you can find the answers of these questions. But just first focus on the question. So we'll discuss each and every interview questions in detail, which you can expect in your next interview. The first question is, explain the end-to-end architecture of your Azure real-time data pipeline. Now this is the question that your interviewer might ask you, because if you have created a pipeline, you need to explain that in a good way to your interviewer. So what you can answer is, so as you can see, if I just go back to the architecture diagram, so if you have executed the entire project and understood the concept of this pipeline, you will answer this question very well. So I'll just explain you the architecture again. Although you can just go through the video and just watch the entire video. We have the dedicated video for each and every question. So I'll just go here. And if you can see, this is the architecture diagram of the project. So what you can say is, you can say to your resume that the source that we have used is the sensor water data. We have used that as our use case. It is continuously generated and stored in an Azure SQL database. For the continuous generation, you can say we have the data updation in the SQL database, where the source of the data is SQL database. We have the data updation in the SQL database. So every time a new sensor record arrives in the SQL database, a new row is inserted into the table. Now, the key challenge in this pipeline is not ingestion, but the identification of the new data, because we don't want to process every process data again and again in the pipeline. We want to make it near real time or real time. So for that, what we have done, we have created a new column that is auto incremented. So if you have executed a project, you might have the information that what is the auto incremental column. So we have created that column which basically assigns a unique value to each and every new node. So later on, when the logic apps runs on top of this SQL database to detect new rows, it will basically detect the new records by comparing it with the last process ID of the record. So during each execution, it fetches only records which ID is greater than the last process ID. Then moving ahead, we have other components, that is Azure Blob Storage. After the new data is processed, it will go to the Azure Blob Storage. And once a new data file resides in the Azure Blob Storage, this Azure Data Factory pipeline will get triggered. And what will happen? This will basically copy the data from Azure Blob Storage into Azure Data Lake Storage N2, which is our data lake storage built in top of the Azure Blob Storage. Now, after that, our next pipeline will get triggered. That basically executes a Medellin architecture, that is gold, bronze layer, silver layer, and gold layer. And accordingly, we will have the process data in our last layer, that is a gold layer. And after that, the Power BI will create a dashboard and a visualization on top of the clean process and enriched data. So this is the architecture of our project. So you can explain the entire architecture in your own language as well. So don't worry about that. We have also put down the answers of all these questions in that same guide. So you can just copy it and then say it and use your own language and then express your points to the interviewer. Now moving on to the next interview question. So this is the next interview question, that what business problem does this real data pipeline solve? So it's a very basic question because the interviewer wants to know whether this pipeline can be modified to solve other use cases as well. So what you can answer is, you can say that at a business level, this pipeline solves a very common but a very complex problem. So more traditional pipelines reprocess entire data set, whereas this pipeline, every time whenever a new data arrives, as it grows into more and more records, this approach becomes very good. So what this pipeline is doing is, this pipeline is not limited to the water sensor data. For this project specifically, the business problem was processing the near real-time water sensor data. But with minor changes, this same design can be reused for other use cases for the near real-time, like IoT sensor platform, banking and transaction system, application and server logs. So the reason this pipeline is reusable, because its core principle remains the same. And the next question we have is, explain the concept of Medallion architecture. Why is it generally used in big data pipeline? So this is a very common asked question. You can also consider it as a conceptual question, because Medallion architecture is commonly adopted principle in the big data techniques. So in our project, we have included this technique in all three parts, the part one, part two, and in this part of the Azure project series, we have also used that in our linked service, or you can say notebook activity pipeline. So Medallion architecture is not just a data pattern, it's a data governance and a quality strategy. So the plan is pretty simple. You can explain these points very clearly to the interviewer, that instead of trying and cleaning or and transforming all the data at once, we improve the data quality gradually, layer by layer. The Medallion architecture is not just a data pattern, it's basically a culmination of different layers where data is processed in different layers. The first layer we have is bronze layer, where the raw data lives. We store this data as received from the source. Whereas if something goes wrong downstream, we can always go back to the raw data because it's our source for our real-time data. Then we have silver layer. So in the second layer, which is silver layer, what we have is, we have the enriching of the raw data. So this layer is where basically the data engineering really happens, where we clean the bad records, remove the duplicates, standardize the formats, enforce the schemas. So you can also explain the code which you have used in the project to enrich this data. Then moving ahead, we have gold layer. So gold layer is optimized for the business consumption. This is where data is aggregated, enriched, and optimized for the performance, so that analytical queries or visualizations can then be built on the data which is there in the gold layer. So Medellin architecture is widely used in big data system because it separates the concerns clearly. It improves the data reliability. So you can put down your points in front of your interviewer, where you can articulately explain your points so that the interviewer can get a grasp of what you are trying to explain by the what you're trying to explain the concept of Medellin architecture. So this is how you can explain the entire Medellin architecture to the interviewer. Moving on to the next question. How did you implement real-time processing using an incremental column in Azure SQL database? So even if you go to the project videos, so as you can see, we have the dedicated videos for that. So if you go to the project video, you can see we have the video adding auto increment to the Azure SQL database, where the expert has clearly defined that we added an ID column using SQL identity SQL command, which basically what that basically does that have whenever a new row inserted into the SQL database, which is a source, this column will allocate a unique value to that row, so that later on when the logic app process the ID to to rectify the new record, what it will do, it will store the last process ID externally. During each execution, it queries the database, whereas it will run some workflows that give me all records where ID is greater than all the IDs of the last process records. So that basically ensures that no duplicate processing will be done and no data is lost. Now this approach is simple, reliably, and widely used in real world system where CDC tools are not available. So CDC are basically change in data capture tools. So you can also use the tools here, but in order to avoid the use of that tool and to put that inside that pipeline, what we have done is we have basically used a new column auto incremented. You just need to run a query in your database, and then after that, whenever a new record gets inserted, this auto increment column will help you to rectify what are the new rows that was appended after the last process ID. Then we have the difference between Azure Data Lake Storage and Azure Blob Storage. So this is a very simple concept, but you need to make sure that you are explaining it to the interviewer articulately. So Azure Blob Storage is a general purpose object store. So in this project, when the logic apps basically rectifies what are the new records, it will send those records to the Azure Blob Storage. Now you might get confused at what are the difference between them. So Azure Data Lake Storage is nothing but a capability or a blob storage which is built on top of the Azure Blob Storage. So this is a base of the storage account in the Azure in the Azure cloud, whereas this data lake storage is nothing but but an enhanced feature which is built in top of the Azure blob storage. So ADLS Gen 2 is basically optimized for Spark, Databricks, and Synapse. So whenever we want to process the data in the Databricks workspace, what we basically prefer is we basically prefer using Azure Data Lake Storage as a storage account or a data lake. That's why in this project, the blob storage is used for the raw ingestion, whereas data lake storage is used for the analytics and transformation in the notebook activity pipeline in the Databricks workspace. So these are the only differences between both of the storage accounts. Then moving ahead, why is fetching incremental data more cost efficient than performing full data loads? So we are going to discuss rest of the questions in the next video. So thanks for watching this video.